Welcome. I'm Angela Searcy.
And I'm Antoinette Taylor. We're glad you're joining us today.
We're excited to share our knowledge. I began as a teacher over 25 years ago. I have a specialization as a neurodevelopmental specialist, and currently I'm a college professor and educational consultant.
I too began over 25 years ago with a background that spans 6 months through higher ed. My specialization is creating policy, practices, and programming in the field of education. Currently, I provide consulting to support innovative practices in the field. Enjoy our journey into play-based learning. It's more than fun and games.
Albert Einstein, one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, described play as the highest form of research. Fast forward to the 21st century, and contemporary researchers have linked play to better cognitive skills, oral language development, self-regulation, pro-social skills, memory development, and academic performance. With evidence like that, you would think pretend play would be universally embraced by both parents and teachers alike. But with so many different theorists and philosophies, teachers worry that play-based curriculum might not adequately prepare children for the rigors of elementary school. Well, a growing body of science has a lot to add to the conversation. Just like you wouldn't want to go to a doctor that was using outdated medical practices, I'm going to share some of the most up-to-date science that should not only ease some of your concerns, but also the concerns of the families you serve. One of the reasons that many of us grapple with the importance of play is that we have outdated images of learning that include students seated at their desks, staring at chalkboards, and scribbling furiously on worksheets. Play, by contrast, allows for freedom of movement that is essential for learning and development. Now, I can't teach about the importance of play without playing. So we're going to pretend this balloon is a brain and use a permanent marker to draw the parts of the brain as I describe them, because your brain is better at remembering images than words. First, we're going to draw a structure called the cerebellum, which is right here behind the brain stem, in the back of the brain. Now, don't be afraid of the word. Honey, if you could say Beyonce, you could say cerebellum, okay? So, the principal task of the cerebellum is to coordinate movement and balance. But since it holds half of the brain's neurons, the name actually means small brain in Latin, it is massively interconnected with other areas in the brain that we use for learning. Biologically, people are wired to learn through interaction and involvement that characterizes play. The movement and enjoyment associated with play stimulates the release of chemicals in the brain that allow for stronger brain messages, regulate the flow of information to higher levels of the brain, and are associated with attention, processing, motivation, concentration, memory, and an elevated mood, which leads to a love of learning. Teachers always ask me, Angela, I love play-based learning, but aren't we setting children up for failure with play-based curriculums when they will need to sit and learn in kindergarten? As early childhood educators, you are not just preparing your students for the next grade, you're preparing them for life. Play-based learning builds better brains that are more capable of handling whatever challenges that lay awaiting them in the future. MRIs show the whole brain lights up in play. More specifically, the experience of play changes the connections of the neurons in the prefrontal cortex, I'm going to draw a site director here, or principal, in this front part of the brain, which represents the frontal lobe, because it supervises and manages cognitive controls such as goal-oriented attention, working memory, and impulse control. Those changes help wire up the brain's executive functioning, which helps children to better regulate emotions and make plans and problem solve. Now, I want you to take a minute and write down all the skills you want young children that you work with to learn from you this year on small Post-it notes. I'm sure some of the skills you wrote down were academic, and both teachers and parents often worry that allowing children to explore and discover may leave them unprepared academically. A common myth about play is that it's not academically rigorous, allowing children to do whatever they want. On the contrary, it creates a sounder base of knowledge that is more retainable. For example, when children are engaged in rewarding, purposeful play, those interactions release a chemical in the brain called dopamine. When dopamine is present during an event or experience, we remember it. The release of dopamine activates the reward centers, which are actually in the midbrain. These help children to stay focused on activities long enough to learn. So here is a simple loop that represents the brain's reward centers. This surge of dopamine prompts the reward structures to pay particular attention to the features of that experience so it can be repeated. This memory turns into motivation, driving children to repeat the experience. This repetition, in turn, triggers neurons to fire together. And honey, neurons that fire together, wire together, establishing a secure neural network so the brain can reliably access the information over time. In other words, whatever children learn through play has more potential to become a permanent pathway. Unlike basic skills instruction, play is not limited to skills like literacy or math alone. Instead, skills are infused and learned within the context of interactions. In other words, neuroscience confirms that play is the vehicle from which skills are developed and the adhesive that makes them stick. So look back at those skills you wrote on those Post-it notes and stick them to your brains. What does research say about children that don't play? Well, studies of rats who have the same neurotransmitters and similar brain structure who were deprived of play had more immature patterns of neuronal connections in the prefrontal cortex. So, if you're still not convinced, go ahead and let the air out of your balloon, because that is what happens to brains without play. Is the tooth fairy real? How about the garbage man? These questions may seem trivial, but how young children answer them is an important indicator of cognitive development. Let parents know play is a cognitive mechanism, because if a child can't imagine a banana as a phone, how will they be able to imagine another person's perspective, the plans for the next big skyscraper, or solutions to abstract math problems? The ability to think abstractly is a huge mental leap forward, and play can make it happen. How should we teach parents when they won't even read your newsletters? I wrote down research and what children are learning in my interest areas. Create a bulletin board with bits of research, letting them know bit by bit the serious business of play. I'm going to end with another quote by one of the most gifted minds, Albert Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand.
So how do you, as an educator in an early learning environment, create the culture, climate, and conditions for transferring playing to learning? You plan. In real estate, it has been said that success comes down to location, location, location. In education, success comes down to planning, planning, planning. This includes planning for play. NAEYC has defined curriculum as the knowledge, skills, abilities, and understandings children are to acquire and the plans for learning experiences through which those gains will occur. For children to experience learning through play, you must put in a lot of effort behind the scenes before the curtain on the stage of your classroom goes up. If you consider yourself as a playwright, you would think of writing a script. As an educator, your script is your lesson plan. Most playwrights start with an idea or image of a finished product. They have a goal in mind. This is their guiding vision. The goal that guides you can be found in the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, IELDS. These standards were created to give educators a roadmap to plan and implement learning opportunities for their young learners. As previously stated, researchers have linked cognitive skills, oral language development, self-regulation, pro-social skills, memory development, and academic performance to play. Each of these areas are represented in the goals, standards, benchmarks, and performance descriptors found in the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards. Using them as you plan for implementation should be your first point of reference when thinking about your students' learning through play. Your lesson plans will ensure that there is purpose in playing. The standards alone, however, aren't enough to provide meaningful play-based learning experiences for your learners. For children's play to lead to learning, a scientifically researched play-based curriculum is necessary. Scientifically researched is defined as research that involves the application of rigorous, systematic, and objective procedures to obtain reliable and valid knowledge relevant to education activities and programs. This leads us back to our previous discussion about the science of play. It might seem as the terminology science when it comes to play is somehow mismatched. However, the science of play is the belief that learning experiences should be easily replicated or generalized far beyond the walls of our classrooms. That is science. Outcomes that are transferable. Once you've determined your areas of focus within the standards, you are in a better position to know how to use your curriculum to transition your plan into practice. The curriculum is what you will use to bring the standards to life. So as you are creating your lesson plan, you have your learning standards and your curriculum with you from the beginning to the end. Finally, as you think of the learning opportunities you want to provide for each of your students when planning for play, it is important to remember the individual abilities, skills, interests, and learning styles of each child. Doing so will help you to intentionally plan for all of your learners, regardless of ability, disability, or advanced ability. This seems like quite a bit to manage on any given day. The phrase, "so many children, so little time might be coming to mind right now. You might be in complete agreement with the procedural aspect of planning, but you're wondering about managing the process of implementing what you have planned. This can be a dilemma. The answer to this dilemma can be found by including differentiation in your planning. Differentiation offers a framework for addressing learner variance as a critical component of instructional planning. Here are some of the characteristics of a classroom when differentiation is practiced. The teacher is clear about what matters in the content or areas of learning. The teacher understands, appreciates, and builds upon student differences. Assessment and instruction are inseparable. All students participate in respectful work. Students and teachers are collaborators in learning. The goals for the classroom maximize growth and individual success for every student. Flexibility is the hallmark of a differentiated classroom. Flexibility. This is our reminder to have a plan for the plan, intentionally thinking about what ifs and if-then scenarios. You will have some children who require this type of thinking for their success and yours. In addition to thinking of differentiation strategies when planning for play, you will also need to include accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are tools or strategies used to provide maximum access to curriculum, classrooms, and activities that include but are not limited to adjusting instructional strategies, adjusting classroom environment, and adjusting across educational settings. Modifications are significant alterations of scope or content of the curriculum or activity when a reasonable accommodation will not be effective for the student. It compensates for intellectual, behavioral, or physical disabilities. Modifications also allow students to use existing skills while promoting the development and acquisition or improvement of new skills. As you create your lesson plans, embed differentiation, accommodation, and modification strategies right into the planning process. This will inform everything that you do as you prepare to implement your specified play-based curriculum across the entire learning environment for all young learners. And yes, planning for everything means everything, including activities, materials, and setup of your classroom. Remember, the lesson plan is the script and your classroom is the stage. That is the platform where your students will learn through play and demonstrate what they know and are able to do. So Donnelly and Joanna, you know we've been spending time here today talking about play-based learning and really getting our thinking around the fact that what is play-based learning for children is actually a lot of work for us as educators. So what I've really been looking at is the planning that goes into letting play be play, but also purposeful for our children. The outcomes that we want for them when they're playing in their interest areas or having their choice activities, or even in small group, there's really purpose in their play. So we know in order to have play lead to learning, we need a curriculum, right?
Yes.
We need a scientifically based curriculum, and we need a grade assessment that's going to allow us to measure the impact of our teaching on children's learning. But what are we really measuring? we're measuring their growth on the standards. So obviously we all know the Common Core state standards in our country are for grades K through 12. But what we've done in Illinois is had an opportunity to look at our early learning standards and make them rigorous and robust as well, hence the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, which is what we're looking at right now. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time about planning for play using these standards as our foundation for the interest areas and our activities and even our interactions and assessment that we're using with children. So just kind of put you on the spot there, Donnelly. When you think about play and the outcomes children get when they're quote unquote playing, what do you think about their physical development and health when it comes to the standards? How you might be able to use the standards to plan for play in the area of developing children's physical development and health?
Well, in physical, I can say that most of the standard is based on what things they can do. So I look at the lesson plans and I look what things need to be done. So if the kids need to be learning how to be moving, balancing, well, I make that fun for them to play along, and even myself, it's part for me. I learn from them too.
And you just said the right thing there, right? This should be a mutual process.
Yes.
True learning, true play, true interactions. They are learning from us, but we're also learning from them. We're learning from them about them. We're learning from them about our own practices. And we're learning how to constantly reference the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, as well as the curriculum that we're using to make sure that our ultimate objective is going to be met for children. So to that end, Joanna, thinking about social emotional development, which we know for children our age that we work with, that's just key to everything. It's the foundation for language, math, everything. So how do you think about using the social and emotional development standards for helping children or planning for their play?
Sure. I think with children, a lot of times with social emotional, a lot of pre-teaching and modeling happens in the classroom. So that when those social situations come up, they've already had those learning points. We've already modeled those behaviors, different solutions, so that you can really get in with the students and problem solve and think through how to get over those social problems or social emotional situations that are occurring, and they already have those tools in place to know how to deal with them.
So I heard you say 3 significant things. Modeling, right? Because everything we want children to know, we must plan to teach them, even planning to play. Problem solving, because ultimately we want them to have the autonomy and the independency to problem solve when there's a conflict between themselves or even within themselves. And then again, just that piece of interacting and learning from them so that these social skills take them far beyond our classrooms to where they're really kindergarten ready. So I think you guys are really right on your way for using our standards with your curriculum for assessment to really making play a purposeful, meaningful experience for your children. So I think we got it.
Mr. Rogers, the much-loved host of the revered television show, said, "Play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. So let's strive for these 5 practical strategies that elevate play beyond just fun and games to serious analysis and academics." Strategy number 1, knowing and loving leads to learning. Get to know each child and personalize your interactions to match their interests and needs. For example, if they love Thomas the Engine, put those items from the show into your play area. Frequent conversations with family members and observations help you to match who you teach to what you teach. Neuroscience research confirms loving is the springboard to learning. So now I want you to reflect on the child that walks through the door and you can't help but grimace. Write down on a Post-it note all of your negative emotions associated with this child. and then throw them away. Because if you can't manage your negative emotions, how do we expect children to? It's important to remember you can't dwell on the negative and get a positive academic outcome. Strategy number 2, keep it real. When we teach skills separately from their application, we force children to tackle problems that are unrelated to real things in the environment and real experiences, unintentionally leaving gaps in the development of conceptual knowledge. Conceptual knowledge is knowing how and when to apply a basic skill. So based on what we learned earlier about the brain, sitting down at a table and signing your name based on a teacher goal is not going to stick. It also decontextualizes the skill of writing, leaving children at a loss for reasons they need to write or why or when they need to use numbers. Instead, embed academic experiences like writing into signing your name on a receipt at a pretend hair salon, or artwork, or counting how many blocks will keep their tower from falling. Remember to relate concepts to students' actual lives. For example, when I linked the cerebellum to Beyonce, this was my attempt to bridge something new with something familiar. In the book Powerful Interactions, How to Connect with Children to Extend Their Learning, it suggests we build links by asking connection questions. What does this remind you of? Where else have you seen or heard this? Has something like this ever happened to you before? Who does that person remind you of? Why? Strategy 3, extend when you pretend. Play is just play until you get involved. It is only with your guidance that you can help children extend their thinking in more sophisticated ways by asking questions like, how did you figure that out? What is another reason that could have happened? How would you describe that? I wonder what we can do with this blue block. Number what patterns do you notice? What can we use to measure that? Call attention to what other children are doing. It adds inspiration and expands their knowledge base. The academic rigor of play increases as you have conversations and make suggestions. How will we remember what we need at the grocery store? Can you write down a prescription for me? Will you write that speeding car a ticket? What can we do to keep the tower from falling? Strategy number 4, laugh it up with language. Add new and interesting words to your play interactions. I suggest teachers make a list of common words they say in their classroom and go to a thesaurus in order to add more sophisticated vocabulary. Try to move from a lower word to a more advanced word. You are correct. That is the color red. It's crimson. I also suggest putting a few new words up in your interest areas each week to support your use of a variety of words. I have to admit, I might forget to say a word like crimson without reminding myself. Teachers always ask me, how do you have a conversation with a child who doesn't talk? Well, first, talk about topics that are interesting to the child. What would you like to talk about? Make sure you give enough response time. While I wait for a reply, I might say, it looks like you're thinking. If a child responds with one word like blue, it's your job to extend by adding more words. You mean the bright blue truck with 4 wheels? Sometimes a child may respond with actions instead of words. Then I might describe what the child is doing. It looks like you are cooking some delicious foods. Open-ended questions are great, but too many questions back to back are a good way to end a conversation and can disrupt play. Strategy number 5, pull play in positive directions. Pretend play allows a child to process what is happening in their real lives and can be influenced by what they see in the media. Children's real lives can include situations that can make other children and even us feel uncomfortable. Instead of stopping the play, laughing at it, or judging the child, their family, or this new generation, pull that play in a new direction. When children make guns, it's often because they're limited to know what else to make. So instead of saying, no guns, show the child what to do with the blocks. When children want to engage in superhero play, I might redirect the play from fighting to a discussion about good things superheroes do. Did you know that superheroes also help people? And then direct the play towards the community helpers in our neighborhood. If children's play moves into drug use, redirect the play into a discussion about medicine and doctors. If the play is becoming overly aggressive, you might add some indoor gross motor activities that let children express themselves physically.
The last, but certainly not least aspect of our discussion is assessment. Curriculum and instruction are incomplete without assessment. For we must pause and take the opportunity to determine the impact our teaching has had on each student's learning. To do so, we should assess students during their naturalistic play experiences to the fullest extent possible. The open-ended questions discussed earlier aren't just questions to extend language and promote interactions with young learners. They also serve as ways to authentically assess children while they are involved in experiences that are natural to them throughout their learning environment. This is what makes your assessment authentic. When you dissect the word authentic, you find that it equates to words such as genuine, valid, credible, and legitimate. That's what you want to know about your students' learning outcomes. So as you are interacting with children in interest areas, small and whole group activities, you are simultaneously observing students in the process of learning and documenting your findings. Assessment is the feedback you need to determine what, how much, and how well children are individually and collectively learning. Shakespeare said, "To be or not to be, that is the question." However, for educators, we say, what do they really know and what can they really do? That is the question. The answers to these questions are within the characteristics of play-based assessment. Play-based assessment is student-centered. The primary observations and collection process occurs during student-directed, choice-related activities throughout the learning environment. Play-based assessment is also teacher-directed in that the teacher is very clear on what skills, knowledge, or behavior they need or want to assess for each student. Play-based assessment is content and domain specific. The information you are seeking when assessing students should initially span across a variety of developmental domains and content areas. As you narrow down what students need based off of your initial assessments, you can then use this information to inform specific domain and/or content areas on which to focus. These next set of play-based assessment characteristics are universal across all ages, classrooms, and teachers from early childhood through higher education. Nevertheless, they are very worthy of our time and consideration. Play-based assessment is formative in nature. As you observe, collect, and analyze the data you have about the impact of your teaching on your students' academic achievement, you become empowered to respond and make adjustments as needed for students individually or collectively. Just as teaching and learning are ongoing, so is play-based assessment. It is an ongoing process. Remember, play-based assessment is student-centered, not checkpoint or collection period centered. Curriculum, instruction, and assessment are simultaneously interrelated, interdependent, and independent. Therefore, play-based assessment is rooted in instruction. It is routinely, systematically, and seamlessly embedded throughout the day and throughout the learning environment. The final, and you could say most relevant characteristic of play-based assessment is that it is mutually beneficial. Play-based assessment provides you with many opportunities to authentically interact with your young learners, which gives you an up-close and personal view of the outcomes of your hard work. Thereby, you gain insight to your teaching practices and further knowledge of exactly what your students need to be successful learners. Recognizing the characteristics of play-based assessment provides focus on the true goal of assessment. Determining the process of play-based assessment will help you reach your assessment goals. So let's go back to the conversation about routinely, systematically, and seamlessly embedded assessment. These three words become your outline for assessment planning. Yes, there's that word again, planning. If you are planning for play, then you must plan for assessment. When planning for instruction and interactions, you should intentionally plan for assessment. You should plan your assessment routine, systems you put in place to support your routine, and all the things you do to make the process seamless. You want your assessment process to catch children in the moment of learning. So you are weaving and flowing in and out of their play experiences for the purpose of observing and collecting data. While establishing an assessment process, you are simultaneously developing your own strategies and techniques for implementing assessment. We often have conversations about implementing instruction, but we don't always have the same conversations about implementing assessment. But if you plan for implementing instruction and plan for implementing assessment at the same time, then you are actually working smarter, not harder. So the strategies and techniques used for implementing instruction should be easily transferable to implementing assessment. Remember that a play-based assessment is student-centered. Therefore, you will want to include applicable accommodations, modifications, adaptations, and differentiation when planning the routines and systems you will use to implement assessment, just as you do when planning for instruction. For children with a documented disability, refer often to their individualized education program or 504 plan as you are planning. These documents will clearly specify the accommodations, modifications, and/or adaptations these young learners will need to be successful. Although the law does not require you do the same for students without a documented disability, best practice dictates that you should. In order to implement an assessment process that is authentic, genuine, valid, credible, and legitimate, you should consider supplementing differentiation with accommodations, modifications, and adaptations. This can be achieved by factoring in age, maturity, culture, life experiences, interests, gender, learning styles, learning interest, English language acquisition, and development, and varying degrees of ability. That is a tall order. But if you consider all of these factors in your thinking during the planning stage, it becomes more and more manageable. Therefore, your play-based assessment process will be mutually beneficial. That is truly a win-win situation. As we close out our discussion on play, let's circle back to Angela's beginning statement where she drew on the expertise of Albert Einstein and bring the conversation full circle by drawing on the expertise of Swiss psychologist Piaget. He believed and advocated that play has multiple purposes and benefits for young learners. During play-based learning, children's knowledge grows. They make discoveries, integrate new information with previous information, develop conflict resolution skills, and develop an overall positive approach to learning. The important work that you are doing each and every day as you plan, interact, instruct, and assess young learners is a part of this process. So you know that play-based learning truly is more than fun and games. It's life-changing.